Welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right in because today we're completely breaking down the neuroscience of modern distraction. If you've been feeling scattered, maybe a little overwhelmed, or just absolutely unable to focus lately, you are totally in the right place. We aren't just going to diagnose the problem here. We're giving you highly actionable, science-backed protocols to reset your brain and actually reclaim your attention.
Look, we've all been there, right? You're exhausted, your eyes are heavy, the room is pitch dark, but you just literally cannot put the phone down. You promise yourself, okay, just 5 more minutes, and suddenly it's 3 a.m. Now, you might think this is just because you lack discipline, but the science tells a very, very different story. It's actually because you have a tiny casino running right inside your head, and it's completely hijacking your biology.
So, to understand this trap, we've got to shatter a massive myth right off the bat. Most people think dopamine is the pleasure molecule, the thing that makes you feel good when you eat a slice of cake or win a game. But it's not. Dopamine is actually the neurochemical of anticipation and motivation. It's the chemical that drives you to seek the reward in the very first place. It doesn't make you feel good when you get the reward. It is literally the voice in your brain screaming, "Do that again." That's exactly why neuroscientists call it the molecule of more. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll cover the modern dopamine trap, inside the compulsion loop, why games beat reality, the meaning crisis, and finally, the ultimate dopamine reset.
Okay, section 1, the modern dopamine trap. You aren't lazy, you're overstimulated.
If you're struggling to focus, I want to validate something for you right now. Your brain isn't broken, and you aren't inherently lazy. You are just overloaded by a modern world that demands absolutely zero effort for a quick hit of stimulation, what we call cheap dopamine. Whether that's endless social media scrolling, junk food, whatever it is, the danger is super real. See, with healthy dopamine release, like when you finally finish a long, hard project, there's a slow rise and your baseline is maintained. But cheap dopamine, it causes a massive, extremely steep rise. And the faster and higher that peak is, the deeper and more painful the crash is right below your baseline, which just triggers this vicious cycle where you're desperate for more.
Moving on to part 2, inside the compulsion loop, or that tiny casino in your head. So how does this biological mechanism actually build into an invisible chain that hijacks your attention? Well, tech companies weaponize it into a 4-step compulsion loop. First, you get a trigger, like your phone buzzes. Then comes the hit, you scroll. But here's the really genius part of the trap. It's a variable reward system. You never quite know what you're going to see next. And that unpredictability creates massive dopamine spikes. Then comes the crash, which triggers the urge to repeat the whole thing. You're basically just pulling the lever on a slot machine in your brain, again and again. Part 3, why games beat reality. Immediate versus delayed feedback.
Now, why are we inexplicably drawn to this virtual stimulation over real-world effort? Well, video games aren't inherently bad, and they aren't just a waste of time. They're actually these perfectly engineered dopamine engines, fulfilling deep psychological needs that the messy, slow feedback real world totally ignores. Think about it. They give you autonomy and a real sense of control. They give you competence through really clear rules and visible progress, like leveling up. And they give you relatedness, offering clear shared goals and cooperation with others. It's like they are a mirror showing what life is missing. When the real world leaves us feeling helpless or unaccomplished or lonely, these virtual environments step right in. They provide this super safe, flow-inducing space where our actions actually guarantee immediate, measurable rewards. So we aren't just escaping reality, we're migrating to a place where our fundamental psychological needs are reliably being met.
Which brings us to part 4, the meaning crisis. Shifting from the brain to the mind. The problem is, relying entirely on these virtual highs traps us on a hedonic treadmill, and this really gets to the deeper, philosophical root of our modern malaise. Drawing on the ancient wisdom of Aristotle, we can see that our modern society is almost entirely optimized for hedonia, short-term pleasure, comforts, and all those cheap dopamine hits. But true, lasting life satisfaction, that comes from eudaimonia. That's a deeper purpose, characterized by meaningful struggle, taking on real responsibility, and the hard-won, anti-fragile satisfaction of genuine adulthood. The philosopher Alan Watts famously called this the backwards law. It's totally counterintuitive, but it states that the harder you chase a positive experience, like trying to be happy or hunting for that next quick hit of stimulation, the worse and more inadequate you actually feel. It literally becomes a negative experience. But when you accept a negative experience, when you embrace difficult, meaningful challenges and choose to struggle for something that actually matters, that generates lasting, unconditional fulfillment. That's what makes you anti-fragile. Finally, part 5, the ultimate dopamine reset, reprogramming your baseline. So how do we actually get there? Well, before we fix our psychology, we absolutely must fix our biology with some highly actionable protocols. I want you to think of your baseline dopamine like water in a wave pool. You have to fill that pool every 24 hours with non-negotiable physical habits. Quality sleep restores those reserves nightly. Getting morning sunlight triggers a healthy early dopamine cascade. Proper nutrition, specifically eating tyrosine-rich foods, provides the actual building blocks for dopamine synthesis. And regular movement keeps your baseline motivation elevated. Now, if you want a scientifically proven fast track to recovery, engaging in non-sleep deep rest, often referred to as NSDR or yoga nidra, is incredibly powerful. Studies have shown that practicing just a short session of this guided, motionless rest can spike your dopamine reserves by a staggering 65%. And it does that all without triggering that painful crash you get from cheap stimulation. Once your biology is set, it's time to apply 3 behavioral steps to resensitize your brain. First, take boring breaks. Literally just stare at a wall and starve your brain of cheap dopamine so it actually craves getting back to work. Second, inhabit the in-between. When you're waiting in line at the grocery store, don't reach for your phone. Just tolerate the stillness. And third, single task. Stop multitasking so you can rapidly shift into focused flow states. You are essentially dropping your bar for boredom to the floor so that difficult tasks actually start to feel intoxicatingly fun. I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. True fulfillment is never, ever going to come from a screen, and it's certainly not going to come from a life entirely devoid of friction. It comes from discovering the hardships you actually relish overcoming. So ask yourself right now, what is the meaningful struggle you are willing to take on today? Because mastering your dopamine doesn't mean removing pleasure from your life. It means choosing exactly what is worth your focus. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.